The first call came before dawn, a sharp, insistent chirp that cut through the pre-sleep quiet of my apartment. I didn't need to check the caller ID. Only a handful of people had that number, and they only used it when the circumstances were unusual. As a forensic anthropologist, my work rarely involved the straightforward. Bones had stories, and it was my job to read them, not just the obvious narratives, but the whispers embedded in the marrow, the forgotten details etched into the periosteum. "Seth here," I answered, my voice rough with sleep. "We have a situation, Mr. Vance," the voice on the other end, belonging to a senior investigator I'd worked with before, was clipped, professional, betraying a hint of underlying urgency. "Blackwood Manor. Dr. Alistair Finch. Apparent fall from the east balcony. Blackwood Manor." The name alone carried weight, a sprawling, Gothic monument clinging to the craggy cliffs of the northern coast, steeped in centuries of murky history, and Dr. Alistair Finch? A titan in historical research, revered for his meticulous work on forgotten legacies. An accident, they said. My gut tightened. Finch was too careful, too precise, to simply stumble from a balcony. Apparent? I probed, already pulling on a pair of worn jeans. That's what the local authorities are calling it. But given Finch's prominence, and the unique nature of Blackwood, the regional director wants a second look. A full workup. "You're our man, Seth." I could hear the unspoken request, find what they missed. It was always the same. The initial assessment, the rush to judgment, then the quiet admission that some things required a different lens, one trained to see beyond the superficial. "Send me the coordinates. I'll be there within the hour." The drive to Blackwood Manor was a test of patience, the road narrowing from asphalt to gravel, then to a barely maintained dirt track that snaked through dense, ancient woodland. The air grew heavy, smelling of damp earth and salt, the distant rumble of the ocean a constant, low thrum. Above, the sky was a bruised purple, promising a storm. I checked the forecast on my phone, gale-force winds and torrential rain expected by late afternoon. Not ideal conditions for a crime scene, or what I suspected would become one. The manor itself emerged from the mist like a specter, a hulking silhouette of dark stone and pointed gables, its windows like vacant eyes staring out at the turbulent sea. It was even more imposing than the photographs suggested, a fortress guarding secrets. A single unmarked sedan and a local patrol car were parked near the grand, wrought-iron gates, which stood ajar, as if inviting intrusion. A uniformed officer, young and visibly overwhelmed, waved me through. Inside the courtyard, a more experienced detective, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper intellect, met me. "Seth Vance," he stated, extending a gloved hand. "Detective Thorne. Thanks for coming. It's a mess." "So I gather," I replied, my gaze sweeping the courtyard, already cataloging details. The wind whipped at my hair, carrying the scent of brine and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet. She led me around the side of the manor, past manicured but now disheveled rose gardens, towards the east wing. "He was found here," she gestured to a roped-off area beneath a high balcony. "The estate manager found him at first light. Called it in immediately." I approached the scene slowly, my eyes scanning every inch of the ground, the wall, the balcony above. The rain hadn't started yet, but the ground was damp from overnight condensation, making the surface of the flagstones slick. Even from this distance, I could discern the telltale pooling, the irregular splatter patterns. Dr. Finch, I murmured, more to myself than to Thorne. The sheet was pulled back, revealing the remains. He lay twisted at an unnatural angle, limbs splayed, a gruesome tableau. His skull was fractured, a grotesque starburst pattern radiating from a central impact point. His neck was broken, his spine angled sharply. Classic fall injuries, yes, but my gaze lingered on his hands. One was clenched, almost clutching at the air, the other lay open, palm up. An anachronism. Blackwood Manor was old, but not that old. I knelt, donning my own gloves, my forensic kit already open beside me. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something else, a faint, acrid smell I couldn't immediately place. The balcony? I asked, my voice low, not breaking my concentration. Secured. Nothing obvious. No signs of struggle up there, according to the initial team. Thorne replied, watching me closely. And his personal effects? Wallet, phone, keys in his pockets. Nothing missing. I moved closer to the body, my senses heightened. The clothing was expensive, tweed and wool, slightly disheveled but intact. No tears that suggested snagging on something sharp during a fall. But what caught my eye was the cuff of his left sleeve. A tiny tear, almost imperceptible, just above the wrist, and embedded within the fibers, a single, minute shard of what looked like polished obsidian. Again, an anachronism. Why would a celebrated historian, falling from a balcony, have petrified wood and obsidian fragments on or near him? Unless he hadn't fallen. My gaze drifted from the scene, past the ancient trees, towards the distant, churning gray of the sea. There, barely visible through the gathering gloom, was a sleek, modern yacht at anchor, storm closing in, sealed briefcases stacked neatly on its deck, reflecting the dull light. A strange juxtaposition against the ancient manor, and an even stranger detail to notice in the immediate aftermath of Finch's death. Who owned that yacht? And what were those briefcases doing out in the open, exposed to the elements? The local authorities saw an accident. Thorne might be on the fence. But I saw something else. I saw an old man, meticulous and precise, suddenly, violently, out of place. The petrified wood, the obsidian, the distant yacht, they weren't just anomalies. They were breadcrumbs, deliberately scattered, or perhaps, carelessly left behind. Finch hadn't just fallen. He'd been pushed. I had just begun to pull. Just above the wrist. My magnifying loupe, clipped to my glasses, brought the microscopic fibers into sharp focus. The tear wasn't a jagged rip, but a clean, almost surgical slice, no more than a few millimeters long. It wasn't consistent with a struggle against rough stone or a snag on a branch. This was a precise cut, as if made by a blade, or perhaps a splinter of something exceedingly sharp and thin. I carefully used tweezers to pluck a few stray threads from the edges of the tear, placing them into a sterile evidence bag. The fabric itself, a fine tweed, showed no other signs of significant damage. I knelt beside the historian's body, my knees sinking slightly into the damp earth. The ground here was soft, a mix of rich topsoil and decaying leaves, but not muddy enough to obscure everything. The uniformed constable, who had been standing a respectful distance away, shifted his weight. I ignored him, my attention absolute. Position of the body, I murmured, more to myself than to the constable. Supine, head angled slightly to the left. Arms splayed, legs bent at the knees. I began my systematic external examination. The initial report had cited a fall from the upper terrace, a drop of roughly 20 feet onto this patch of ground below. If that were the case, I expected certain types of trauma, blunt force impacts, perhaps a crushed skull, certainly more widespread bruising and contusions. I ran gloved fingers along the historian's exposed skin, starting with the cranium. His gray hair, thinning at the crown, was matted with a mixture of dirt and something else, something gritty. No visible lacerations on the scalp, no obvious depressions. I palpated gently, feeling for any underlying fractures. Nothing immediately apparent, but I knew better than to rely on gross observation alone. My hands moved to the neck, then the shoulders. His left clavicle felt intact. The right, however, was another matter. As my fingers traced the bone, I felt a subtle, almost imperceptible shift beneath the skin. A hairline fracture, perhaps, or something more complex. It wasn't the sort of clean break I'd expect from a direct impact. It felt twisted. A spiral fracture, perhaps, or a green stick break, which would indicate a bending or twisting force rather than a straight impact. This was inconsistent. A 20-foot fall would typically result in more catastrophic, compressive injuries to the upper torso, not a nuanced break like this. My suspicion, which had been a quiet hum in the back of my mind, intensified into a low thrum. The expensive wool jacket was mostly intact, save for the precise tear on the cuff. I noticed faint, almost iridescent flecks clinging to the dark fabric of his trousers, particularly around the knees and shins. They shimmered subtly under the overcast light. I leaned closer, my loupe once again pressed to my eye. These weren't dust motes from the estate. They were crystalline, angular, catching the light like minuscule facets. I pulled out a small, pre-sterilized brush and a collection vial. Gently, I swept the shimmering particles from the fabric, careful not to contaminate them. They looked like crushed mineral fragments, unlike anything I'd seen in the local geology reports for the estate. This region was known for its rich, loamy soil, not for unique crystalline deposits. Where could these have come from? And why were they concentrated on the lower half of his body? My mind raced, piecing together the subtle discrepancies. The precise tear on the cuff, the unusual fracture in the clavicle, and now this alien dust. None of it aligned with a simple fall. A fall implies uncontrolled impact, chaotic damage. These details spoke of something else entirely, a struggle, perhaps, or an interaction with an unknown environment before the fall. I stood, stretching my back, and glanced towards the distant coastline. Through a break in the trees, past the sprawling, manicured lawns of the estate, I could just make out the glint of a hull on the choppy gray water. Even from this distance, the vessel exuded an air of discreet wealth, a sleek silhouette against the bruised horizon. The thought struck me, how easily such a vessel could transport anything, or anyone, away from prying eyes, especially with a storm brewing. It was a detail that added another layer of unease to the scene, a sense of something larger and more complex at play. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves in the ancient oaks around us, carrying the scent of impending rain. The constable shifted again, eyeing the darkening sky. He knew the drill, I wouldn't be rushed. My work was just beginning. I returned my focus to the historian. I needed to document every bruise, every abrasion, every fracture, no matter how minute. His hands, I noticed, were surprisingly clean, the fingernails intact, no defensive wounds. But on the back of his right hand, near the knuckles, was a faint, almost faded bruise. It wasn't from this fall. It was from something else. The more I looked, the more the narrative of a tragic accident crumbled around me. This wasn't an accident. This was a carefully constructed scene, designed to mislead. And I was going to dismantle it, piece by meticulous piece. A dangerous story, I suspected. The fibers, examined under my microscope back in my temporary workspace, a converted storeroom in the estate's lesser-used wing, whispered of something sharp, precise. My focus, however, was on the particulate matter embedded around the edges of the cut and within the victim's clothing folds. I spent hours hunched over the workstation, the hum of the air purifier a constant companion. My hands, usually steady, felt a slight tremor of anticipation. The preliminary scan had shown an unusual mineral composition. Now, under higher magnification and with the microspectrometer warmed up, I could confirm it. The crystalline structures were distinct, unlike anything naturally occurring in the immediate vicinity of the estate. Bismethoxychloride, I murmured to myself, the words tasting like metal and dust. It was a synthetic pearl pigment, often used in cosmetics, paints, and specialized ceramics. But that wasn't the most intriguing part. Mixed with it, in minute quantities, were particles of a rare earth mineral, distinctly cerussite, a lead carbonate. The specific isotopic signature I was detecting pointed not to a natural deposit, but to a refined, processed form. A specific provenance, perhaps. This wasn't a random speck of dirt. This was a signature. A signature that didn't belong on an ancient estate. I cross-referenced the unique cerussite signature with geological and archaeological databases. It pinged a few obscure academic papers, all pointing to a singular, remote region known for its small, historically significant lead mines that had been abandoned for centuries, yet were central to the obscure, late-career research of the deceased historian, Dr. Finch. Finch had recently published a controversial paper hypothesizing the existence of a forgotten pre-Roman trade route, citing unusual lead artifacts. The estate manager, a man of meticulous habits and even more meticulous records, had provided me with Finch's research notes, albeit reluctantly. Among them, I found GPS coordinates scrawled on a napkin, tucked into a folder labeled Project Cerberus, Private. The coordinates pointed precisely to one of those long-abandoned lead mining sites, miles from any established road, deep in an isolated valley. An unsanctioned archaeological dig site. The air grew heavy, pregnant with the scent of damp earth and pine. By the time my rented SUV bounced its way into a clearing, the sky was a bruised purple, threatening rain. Before me lay a scene of organized disarray. It looked abandoned, but not for long. The traces of recent activity were clear: fresh boot prints in the mud, a half-eaten energy bar discarded near a pickaxe. A figure emerged from the tent as I cut the engine, a young woman, her face smudged with dirt, hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. His eyes, initially wary, hardened with recognition. "You're Seth," he stated, his voice tight, devoid of welcome. "The police were here already." "Nothing to see." "I'm not the police," I countered, stepping out of the vehicle, the crunch of gravel under my boots echoing in the sudden stillness. "I'm a forensic anthropologist. I'm investigating Dr. Finch's death." "I believe you're the research assistant." She hesitated, her gaze flicking nervously towards the excavated pits. "I was." Until he let me go. A few weeks ago. Her name, I remembered from Finch's notes, was Anya. He let you go, but you're still here, I observed, gesturing to the site. The tension in her shoulders was palpable. Just packing up his things, she mumbled, avoiding my gaze. Cleaning up the mess. The bismuthoxychloride and cerussite particles I found on Dr. Finch's clothing suggest he was here recently, I pressed, watching her reaction. Her jaw tightened. The cut on his wrist was precise, not accidental. It looked like it could have been caused by a sharp edge of a particular type of ceramic, one that might be found in an ancient artifact. Perhaps coated with a pigment containing these very materials. Her eyes finally met mine, wide with a flicker of fear. He was obsessed. She whispered, her voice barely audible above the rising wind. The lost artifact. He called it that. Said it wasn't just a legend. He was convinced this mine held something no one had seen in millennia. What kind of artifact? I asked, stepping closer. The first drops of rain began to fall, pattering softly on the leaves. She wrung her hands. He wouldn't say. Just that it was the key. The key to understanding everything. He started having these meetings, late at night. Secretive. With collectors. Powerful figures. He told me to forget I saw anything. Said they were just investors, but the way he looked. Terrified. Collectors of what? I pushed, the urgency in my voice matching the growing intensity of the storm. She shivered, pulling her thin jacket tighter. Ancient things. Things that shouldn't be moved. Things with history. He was changing, Seth. He wasn't the same man. He was desperate. Said he was close to finding it, but that they were closing in. He feared for his life, but he wouldn't stop. The wind whipped around us, carrying the first heavy drops of the coming downpour. Finch hadn't just died in a tragic fall. And these enigmatic figures weren't just collectors, they were predators. I had just walked into their hunting ground. The wind, now a sustained howl, lashed at my coat as I stood at the edge of the largest excavation pit. Rain, cold and relentless, plastered my hair to my forehead. Finch hadn't simply fallen. The sheer scale of this pit, the raw earth churned up, the obvious signs of recent, hurried work, it all screamed of something far more deliberate than a tragic misstep. He had stumbled into something far older, far darker, and far more dangerous than anyone had yet acknowledged. I'd returned to the site against the urging of the local investigator, a man whose patience had worn thin days ago. His name, I vaguely recalled, was Miller, but I simply thought of him as the lead detective. He wanted a signature, a conclusion, and I wasn't giving it to him. Not yet. Not while the earth still held secrets. The heavy equipment, parked haphazardly, looked like forgotten giants in the downpour. My boots sank into the mud, each step a squelching protest. I moved closer to the pit, my gaze sweeping over the exposed soil layers. There were fresh scrapes on the rock face, not from geological processes, but from something metallic and heavy. A thin layer of recently disturbed earth covered an area that should have been undisturbed. Someone had been here, digging, not for historical preservation, but for something else entirely. Their work was sloppy, desperate. I knelt, my fingers numb as I carefully dislodged it. It was a fragment of pottery, no larger than my thumb, but its surface held an unmistakable glaze, a deep, almost iridescent black, with faint, intricate patterns etched into it. The design wasn't Roman, nor was it native to this region's known indigenous cultures. It certainly wasn't medieval, the period Finch had dedicated his life to. My breath hitched. This wasn't just anachronistic, it was a screaming contradiction. Still at it, Seth? The lead detective's voice cut through the wind, sharp with irritation. He stood a few yards back, under the dubious shelter of a large oak, his arms crossed over his chest. The sheriff wants this wrapped up. The family wants closure. It was an accident. The man was old, the ground was uneven. I slowly rose, clutching the pottery shard. With all due respect, Detective, Finch's bones told a different story. And this site. I gestured vaguely at the hastily disturbed earth. This isn't just an archaeological dig. Someone's been here recently, moving earth, not with care, but with force. The detective scoffed. Diggers do that. They get excited. They move things. He took a step closer, his eyes narrowed. You're grasping at straws, Seth. There's no evidence of foul play. No struggle. No weapon. Just a fall. There's this, I countered, holding up the pottery fragment. This doesn't belong here. Not in this period, not in this region. He barely glanced at it. Another old shard. This estate is full of them. Look, I'm telling you, the pressure is on. From above. This needs to be an accident. From above. That confirmed my suspicions. Someone powerful wanted this buried. My job isn't to give anyone what they want, detective. It's to find the truth. He sighed, running a hand over his face. Just be careful, Seth. Some truths are better left undisturbed. He turned and walked away, his shoulders hunched against the rain, leaving me alone with the howling wind and the unsettling fragment in my palm. The drive back to my temporary lab, an old, repurposed warehouse on the outskirts of town, was a blur of wipers and dim headlights. The detective's veiled warning echoed in my mind. Be careful. It sounded less like concern and more like a threat. I unlocked the heavy metal door, the clang echoing in the cavernous space. The air inside was still and cool, smelling faintly of dust and old concrete. I flicked on the fluorescent lights, bathing the room in a harsh, clinical glow. That's when I saw it. The main door, while locked, had faint scrape marks near the latch. I moved deeper inside. My desk drawers were slightly ajar. Files, which I'd meticulously organized, were subtly displaced. Nothing appeared to be missing, my field notes, the analysis equipment, even Finch's fragmented remains were untouched in their secure storage. They hadn't taken anything of value. They had been looking for something specific, or perhaps, they hadn't been looking to take it all. This wasn't a random burglary. This was a message. A clear, unmistakable warning. Someone knew I was getting too close. The rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof, a rhythmic, unsettling drumbeat. The break-in, the detective's warning, the anachronistic pottery, it all coalesced into a single, dangerous realization. Finch's death wasn't just about an artifact. It was about controlling a narrative, suppressing a truth, and the people behind it were willing to go to great lengths to ensure their secret remained buried. I pictured them, far from this damp, grimy warehouse, perhaps in a more opulent setting, making their illicit deals. The storm was closing in on me too, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was now squarely in its path. The old, repurposed warehouse groaned around me, a symphony of rust and creaking timber battling the relentless drumming of rain on the corrugated roof. My temporary lab, hastily assembled amidst forgotten crates and dust-shrouded machinery, offered little comfort, but it was private. The fragment, no bigger than my thumb, lay under the harsh glare of the microscope. Its surface, a rich terracotta hue, bore the faint impression of an ancient glyph, mimicking a style I knew intimately from the early dynastic period of Mesopotamia. I adjusted the focus, my breath held. The initial macroscopic examination had been unsettling enough. The texture, the subtle variations in color, the tiny, almost imperceptible inclusions of mica all screamed authenticity. Yet, something had niggled at the edge of my perception, a discordant note in an otherwise flawless composition. Under the powerful lens, that discordance amplified. I moved the fragment, scanning its edges, its fractured surfaces. The clay matrix itself was expertly aged, the mineral deposits layered with a precision that defied natural processes. I spent an hour, then two, running chemical spot tests, noting the reactions, comparing them to known profiles of genuine artifacts and modern materials. My fingers, stained with reagents, moved with practiced ease. Then I saw it. Not a single anachronism, but a confluence of them, each individually subtle but cumulatively damning. The firing temperature, while high, wasn't quite right for the period. There was a specific, almost imperceptible sheen to some of the internal inclusions, indicative of a modern industrial kiln, not an ancient pit fire. More damning still was the binder used in the surface pigmentation. While the pigments themselves were historically accurate ochres, lapis lazuli, the binding agent was a synthetic polymer, a microscopic signature of the 21st century, masterfully blended to mimic organic resins. It was a ghost in the machine, a whisper of the present woven into the fabric of the past. My gut clenched. This wasn't just old pottery. This was a masterpiece of deception. The fragment wasn't merely a misplaced artifact, it was an incredibly sophisticated forgery, designed to mimic a specific ancient civilization with breathtaking accuracy. Finch hadn't stumbled upon an obscure piece of history. He had unearthed a lie. The implications hit me with the force of a physical blow. Finch wasn't just a historian researching artifacts, he was a scholar who had, unwittingly or intentionally, exposed a high-stakes forgery ring. The anachronistic details I'd found on the body, the bizarre placement of the genuine ancient coin, it all clicked into place. These weren't just anomalies, they were breadcrumbs, deliberately left, or perhaps clues Finch himself was gathering, signals of a deeper, more dangerous game. And now, I was holding a piece of the evidence. My determination hardened, pushing aside the cold tendrils of fear. If Finch was exposing forgeries, there had to be more. He wouldn't have relied on a single fragment. My mind raced, replaying every detail of his study, every glance I'd taken. I remembered the heavy oak desk, the towering bookshelves, the way the light fell across the antique globe. I left the warehouse, the rain still drumming its relentless rhythm, and drove back to the estate, the sense of urgency a sharp spur in my side. The grand old house felt different now, no longer just a scene of a tragic death, but a silent testament to a hidden conflict. The local officer, a stern woman with weary eyes, was still posted at the main entrance. "Back again, Seth?" he asked, his voice flat. "Just need to re-examine the study, if you don't mind," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "A new lead." She hesitated, then nodded, unlocking the heavy front door. "Don't touch anything you haven't already documented." "Wouldn't dream of it," I assured her, though my intentions were precisely to touch, to feel, to search with a new understanding. Inside, the study was as I'd left it, a mausoleum of knowledge. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and polished wood. I walked directly to the desk, running my hands along the smooth, worn surface. I checked the drawers again, not for obvious documents, but for false bottoms, for hidden catches. Nothing. My gaze swept the bookshelves, a wall of leather-bound tomes. Finch was meticulous, his books arranged by subject, by era. I worked my way slowly, systematically, through shelves dedicated to ancient trade routes, then metallurgy, then ceramic dating. It was behind a particularly dense section on archaeological provenance that I felt it, a faint give in the back panel of the shelf, barely perceptible. My fingers probed, searching for a seam. There. I pressed, and with a soft click, a narrow section of the shelf swung inward, revealing a shallow, concealed compartment. Inside, nestled on a velvet lining, were two items, a slim, unlabeled USB drive and a folded piece of heavy parchment. I carefully extracted them. The parchment felt ancient, but the ink, a deep sepia, seemed suspiciously fresh. Unfolding it, I saw a cryptic, coded map. It wasn't a geographical map in the traditional sense, but a series of interconnected symbols and lines, overlaid with what looked like astrological notations and obscure historical references. Yet, amidst the esoteric symbols, one image stood out, a stylized drawing of a vessel, clearly a yacht, anchored near a jagged coastline, with a storm closing in on the horizon. Next to it, tiny, almost imperceptible, were the faint outlines of what could only be sealed briefcases. My mind reeled. This wasn't just about ancient artifacts anymore. The image of the yacht, the sealed briefcases, the storm, it painted a vivid picture of illicit dealings, a high-stakes exchange taking place under the cover of turbulent weather. Finch had been on the verge of exposing something massive, something that reached far beyond the quiet halls of academia. I pocketed the USB drive and the map, my hand tightening around them. I walked directly to the desk, running my fingers along the cool, polished mahogany. The surface was smooth, unblemished, a testament to the meticulous care given to the estate's furnishings. The scent of old paper and wood was strong here, a comforting perfume to an investigator like me. I started methodically, drawer by drawer, feeling for any irregularities, any subtle shifts in weight or texture that might betray a secret. The first few yielded only mundane stationery, forgotten pens, and stacks of research notes, all meticulously organized. Then, in the bottom right drawer, my fingers brushed against something odd. Not a seam, exactly, but a faint groove, almost imperceptible, along the inner side panel. It was too precise to be a natural imperfection in the wood. I pressed, probed, applied gentle pressure at various points. A faint click echoed in the quiet room. The bottom panel of the drawer shifted, revealing a shallow cavity beneath. Inside, nestled against the velvet lining, were two items, a tightly rolled parchment, brittle with age but sealed with an unfamiliar wax, and a slim, metallic data drive, the kind used for high-security storage, its surface devoid of any markings. My pulse quickened. This was it. The anachronisms, the whispered warnings from the estate's caretaker, the historian's own peculiar habits, they all converged on this moment. I carefully extracted both. The parchment felt ancient, hinting at complex cartography or perhaps an elaborate cipher. The data drive, however, was clearly a product of modern technology, a stark contrast. The juxtaposition spoke volumes about the historian's life, straddling two worlds. Back at my temporary workstation, a cleared table in a less formal sitting room, I set about the task. The parchment first. It was a forensic linguist's dream, or nightmare. My expertise wasn't just in bones and dirt, it extended to the historical context of communication. This was clearly a coded message, its complexity designed to deter all but the most dedicated. I photographed it, then began to cross-reference the symbols against known historical ciphers and ancient languages I had catalogued in my mind and in my secure digital archives. Hours blurred. The air outside grew heavy, the first distant rumble of thunder shaking the windows. The parchment, I began to discern, was not a static message but a multi-layered decryption key itself. Certain symbols, when rearranged according to a specific sequence hinted at by the proto-Elamite fragments, formed coordinates. Not geographical, but temporal and philosophical. They pointed to a network, not a place. Then came the data drive. Plugging it into my secure laptop, I was met with a robust encryption protocol. This wasn't off-the-shelf software, it was custom, designed by someone with a deep understanding of digital security. But I had my methods, my specialized tools, honed over years of digital archaeology. Brute force was rarely elegant, but pattern recognition and a deep dive into the metadata often yielded backdoors. I worked patiently, the rhythmic hum of the laptop a counterpoint to the rising wind outside. The first breakthrough came after an hour of relentless probing. The words scrolled across my screen, stark and chilling. It spoke of the legacy, a sacred trust passed down through generations, dedicated to preserving a specific, revisionist version of history. It detailed the Keepers, a clandestine organization comprised of influential figures, academics, financiers, politicians who manipulated archaeological finds, altered historical records, and controlled the narrative of the past. This wasn't about simple forgery or illicit trade, it was about power, about shaping the very fabric of human understanding. The files outlined how genuine artifacts, priceless relics, were acquired, hidden, or subtly altered to support their manufactured historical timeline. The historian hadn't just been documenting history, he had been either complicit in its manipulation or, more likely, had stumbled upon the truth and paid the ultimate price. The parchment's coordinates, I now understood, were not places on a map, but points of contact within this network, a way to identify fellow keepers or their operatives. It was a web, vast and intricate, extending far beyond this remote estate. A message, nested deep within the encrypted files, then caught my eye. It was an urgent directive, time-stamped mere hours before the historian's death. Rendezvous point activated. Assets to be secured. Arrival by storm. Prepare for extraction. Extraction. My extraction. The historian must have had a contingency plan, perhaps expecting discovery. Or perhaps this was a trap. Either way, the information was too vital to ignore. I had to follow the trail. I gathered my equipment, secured the laptop and the recovered data, a knot forming in my stomach. The storm outside was no longer distant rumbling, rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled like a banshee. Getting to the designated rendezvous was a harrowing drive through the pelting rain. The winding estate roads turned treacherous. They understood. We drove in a black, unmarked vehicle, the wipers barely keeping pace with the deluge. We reached the private dock, a small, isolated inlet protected by ancient stone walls. The air was thick with salt and the metallic tang of an approaching squall. It bobbed violently, a testament to the storm's growing fury. The waves crashed against the hull with an unsettling rhythm. Boarding was swift, urgent. The deck was slick, the wind threatening to tear my clothes from my body. Inside, the yacht's cabin was surprisingly calm, insulated from the tempest. A single figure, a burly man with a weathered face, gestured towards a plush seat at a polished table. The silence was punctuated only by the groan of the yacht and the relentless drumming of rain against the cabin. My forensic decryption skills had opened a door, but now I was inside, caught in the heart of a tempest, both literal and metaphorical. The briefcases hinted at the next layer of the mystery, promising more secrets, more dangers. The game, I realized, had only just begun. My forensic decryption skills had always been more than a hobby, they were a professional calling, a way to peel back layers of digital obfuscation. The chilling words of the Legacy Manifesto now glared from my laptop screen, its pixels stark against the gloom inside the yacht's cabin. The vessel groaned, a deep, resonant sound as the anchor chain strained. The sealed briefcases sat on the table beside the laptop, their contents now partially revealed by the manifesto's disturbing rhetoric. I'd focused on the digital first, a natural inclination, but the physical evidence couldn't be ignored. I ran a hand over the cold metal of one briefcase, then popped its clasps. Inside, nestled among a few innocuous documents and a satellite phone, was a small, velvet pouch. My fingers, accustomed to discerning minute textures, recognized the faint grittiness clinging to the velvet. Finch's remains, on the ancient artifacts in his study, and even subtly embedded in the fibers of his clothes. A trace element analysis, run on the portable spectrometer I carried, had confirmed its unusual composition, a mix of silicates and rare earth elements, not naturally occurring together in any common geological formation. It pointed to a very specific, manufactured environment, or a singular, untouched source. The manifesto spoke of the keepers, of safeguarding ancient truths and controlling narratives. The dust, then, was their signature, an inadvertent fingerprint left across their clandestine operations. My gaze drifted from the screen, past the briefcases, to the churning gray waters outside. The yacht, my temporary sanctuary, felt less secure with every passing wave. I needed answers, context beyond these cryptic words and microscopic particles. Dr. Finch, a historian of renown, wouldn't have been swept into this without a deeper connection, likely through his academic circles. His former mentor, a retired curator known for his extensive knowledge of obscure historical societies, surfaced in my thoughts. He was my next logical step. Leaving the yacht required navigating the storm-tossed waters in a smaller launch, a jarring transition from the relative stability of the larger vessel. The journey to the mainland was a bone-rattling affair, the small craft pitching violently, salt spray stinging my face. I secured a vehicle, the tires spitting gravel as I drove through winding country roads, the rain still relentless. The curator lived in a secluded cottage, its stone walls draped in ivy, nestled deep within a dense thicket of ancient oaks. The kind of place where time moved differently, where secrets might be hoarded like forgotten texts. I knocked on the heavy oak door, the sound swallowed by the wind. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing a gaunt figure, his face a roadmap of age, framed by wisps of white hair. He peered at me through thick spectacles, his eyes sharp despite their watery appearance. "I'm Seth," I stated, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "I need to speak with you about Dr. Finch. It's urgent." His expression tightened. "Finch is gone. A tragic accident, I heard." His voice was raspy, laced with a weariness that went beyond physical age. He started to close the door. "It wasn't an accident," I interjected, stepping slightly forward, preventing the door from fully latching. "I found something, evidence suggesting otherwise. A unique mineral dust. And a document, the Legacy Manifesto." The name hung in the air, a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The curator's hand, which had been pushing the door, froze. He hesitated, then slowly, reluctantly, swung the door wider. "Come in, then. You're soaked." Inside, the cottage was a labyrinth of books and ancient maps, dust motes dancing in the faint light filtering through leaded pane windows. The air smelled of old paper and wood smoke. He gestured to a worn armchair by a crackling fireplace. "Finch, and on objects in his study," I explained, holding it up. "My analysis indicates it's a very specific composite. I believe it's linked to the keepers mentioned in this." I placed my laptop on a small side table, opening it to the manifesto. The curator leaned in, his gaze fixed on the screen, then on the dust. A long, drawn-out sigh escaped him. "The keepers," he murmured, the words heavy. I had hoped. After all these years, they had faded into myth. He settled into his own armchair, his posture slumped. "They are real, Seth. A society, ancient and deeply entrenched. They believe certain archaeological finds are too volatile for public consumption, too dangerous to alter established historical narratives." "Political and financial gain?" I pressed, recalling the manifesto's hints at power and control. He nodded slowly. "And ideological. They control what is found, what is preserved, and what is buried for centuries." He was getting too close to something they wanted hidden. He always had a relentless curiosity, a knack for uncovering inconvenient truths. "And the dust?" I pushed, gesturing to the evidence bag. "Does it mean anything to you?" He picked up the bag, tilting it, observing the minuscule particles. His brow furrowed in concentration. This is distinctive. I only know of one place with such a unique geological signature. An estate, remote, rarely accessed. The Finch family has historical ties to it, though it's been under different ownership for generations." He paused, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The Blackwood estate. It's said to be built atop an ancient site, one of profound significance, a place that has always been shrouded in secrecy." The name resonated, a missing piece slotting into place. Blackwood estate. Remote. Historically significant. The storm outside seemed to intensify, the wind howling around the cottage, a mournful sound. My path, dangerous as it promised to be, was now irrevocably clear. The Blackwood estate was where the threads of this conspiracy converged. Elias Thorne's estate, a sprawling silhouette of stone and slate, clung to the cliff face like a barnacle, its few lit windows mere pinpricks against the gathering gloom. The curator's hushed confession had been the final push. Blackwood estate was central, and the unique mineral dust was my compass. My pack was light, stocked with essentials, lockpicking tools, a compact digital camera, and a small, high-powered flashlight. The determination in my gut was a cold, hard knot. This wasn't just about the historian anymore, it was about the wider network, the keepers, and the artifacts they plundered. I lowered myself into the small, inflatable dinghy I'd secured to the yacht's stern, the choppy water slapping against the rubber. Each stroke of the muffled oars was deliberate, propelling me towards the jagged rocks that formed the estate's natural barrier. The wind, now a howling gale, tore at my hair, but it also masked the faint sounds of my approach. The estate's perimeter, I knew from my preliminary reconnaissance, was heavily monitored landside. The water, however, was its blind spot, a calculated risk Thorne likely deemed unnecessary given the treacherous currents and exposed coastline. The climb up the craggy path was arduous, each handhold slick with rain and spray. The air grew stiller as I neared the main structure, the roar of the ocean fading slightly behind thick stone walls. A service entrance, discreetly tucked away behind a stand of gnarled cypress trees, was my target. The lock was a modern electronic one, but my tools, and a bit of patience, bypassed it within minutes. A soft click, and the heavy door swung inward, revealing a dimly lit corridor that smelled faintly of ozone and something metallic. My small flashlight, set to its lowest beam, cut a narrow path through the gloom. The corridor led into a warren of utility rooms before opening into a larger, more modern section of the estate. The hum of unseen machinery vibrated through the floor. This was it. Following the faint sound, I navigated a labyrinth of polished hallways until a faint glow emanated from beneath a heavy, soundproof door. I paused, listening. No voices, just the steady, rhythmic thrum. I tried the handle, it was unlocked. Pushing it open just enough to peer inside, I saw it, a state-of-the-art forgery workshop. The room was vast, dominated by a series of gleaming workstations. High-resolution 3D scanners projected intricate holographic images of ancient pottery shards onto large screens. Precision laser engravers stood ready to replicate delicate inscriptions. Chemical baths bubbled gently, clearly designed for accelerated aging of materials. On one bench, an unfinished replica of a Mycenaean dagger lay beside a stack of genuine, ancient bronze ingots. Another held a partially completed clay tablet, its cuneiform script painstakingly etched, waiting for its final, artificial patina. My stomach tightened. The sheer scale, the technological sophistication, confirmed the depth of Thorne's illicit operation. This wasn't a small-time counterfeiter, this was an industrial-level factory of deception. My camera clicked silently, capturing every detail. This was the source. I knew there had to be more. Thorne wouldn't invest this much in forgery without a trove of genuine artifacts to fuel the market. My gaze swept the workshop, searching for anything out of place. A section of the wall, behind a sliding panel disguised as an ordinary storage unit, caught my eye. The seams were too perfect, the texture slightly off. With renewed caution, I approached, running my fingers along the cool surface. Beyond it, a cool, dry air met me, carrying the faint scent of aged parchment and earth. This was the vault. Genuine, priceless artifacts. A complete set of Roman medical instruments, their bronze gleaming. Scrolls of papyrus, carefully preserved in climate-controlled cylinders. Etruscan gold jewelry, exquisitely crafted, still retaining its ancient luster. A collection of pre-Columbian pottery, vibrant with symbolic designs, sat beside a dozen exquisitely carved ivory figurines from the Bronze Age Aegean. Each piece was clearly authentic, its provenance undeniable, yet there were no museum tags, no catalog numbers from legitimate collections. These were treasures ripped from their rightful resting places, destined for the black market, likely authenticated by the forgeries produced just meters away. My camera flashed again, documenting the scale of Thorne's plunder. As I zoomed in on a particularly rare obsidian mirror, a soft, high-pitched whine echoed through the vault, quickly followed by a dull, resonant thump from the workshop. The security system. I'd tripped something. A laser grid, perhaps, or a pressure sensor I hadn't detected. Red indicator lights, previously unseen, now blinked urgently along the vault's ceiling. A low, insistent alarm began to pulse through the floor. I had mere seconds. I snapped a few more hurried shots, focusing on a unique, inscribed stone tablet that bore a striking resemblance to some iconography I'd seen in research on the keepers. The pneumatic hiss returned as the vault door began to slide shut, slowly but inexorably. I squeezed through the narrowing gap, scrambling back into the workshop just as the heavy panel slammed shut with a final, echoing clunk. The workshop itself was now bathed in a harsh, pulsing red light. Footsteps, heavy and rapid, thudded in the corridor outside. My escape route was already compromised. I sprinted back the way I came, adrenaline fueling my legs. The metallic smell in the utility corridor was stronger now, a faint, acrid tang. I could hear the shouts of guards, their voices growing closer. My only option was the service entrance. The wind howled like a banshee, tearing at my clothes. The guards were already fanning out from the main estate, their flashlights cutting through the driving rain. I scrambled down the treacherous path, my hands tearing on the slick rock, ignoring the pain. I didn't waste a second, pushing it back into the furious waves, fumbling with the oars. Shots rang out from the shore, muffled by the storm, but close enough to send splinters of stone spraying near my head. I dug the oars into the water, fighting the current, the waves threatening to capsize me with every stroke. The yacht, a distant, bobbing beacon, was my only hope. The storm, once my cover, now threatened to claim me entirely. The storm was a tangible entity, a looming threat that mirrored the pressure building within me. Every gust was a reminder of the isolation, of how utterly alone I was in piecing together this intricate, deadly puzzle. I retreated to the cabin, the heavy door thudding shut behind me, sealing out the immediate fury of the elements, but not the pervasive sense of dread. The polished mahogany table was a dark island in the center of the room, the briefcases squat and purposeful. I unlatched the first one, the metallic click echoing in the confined space. Inside, meticulously organized, were the high-resolution photographs from Finch's estate, the scene of the fall, the victim's remains, the seemingly innocuous details I'd spent days documenting. The second briefcase held the trace evidence reports, soil analyses, pollen counts, and the preliminary findings from the bone samples. My own handwritten notes, scrawled on yellow legal pads, filled the third. I spread the photographs across the table, arranging them in a chronological sequence, then overlaying them with magnified images of specific details. The first image was a wide shot of the precipice, the jagged rocks below. I moved to a close-up of the rock face, where a faint, almost imperceptible discoloration marred the stone. My finger traced the anomaly. A residue. Not natural. The analysis confirmed it, a unique blend of ancient pigments, consistent with those found on the fragments of the pre-dynastic pottery I discovered buried near Finch's foundation. Next, I laid out the photos of Finch's body. The specific pattern of bruising on the clavicle, the subtle fracture lines in the humerus that didn't quite align with a simple impact fall. Then, the images from Thorne's property. The same unique soil composition, the same ancient pollen grains, indicative of the specific region in the Middle East where the artifacts originated. It wasn't just a match, it was an undeniable fingerprint. The soil on Thorne's boots, recovered by the diligent investigator, was identical to the trace found embedded in Finch's clothing, not from the immediate fall site, but from the approach path leading to the cliff face. A path Finch had no reason to take. I cross-referenced the microscopic striations on the bone fragments from Finch's remains with the magnified images of specific antique tools found in Thorne's workshop. The initial assessment had dismissed these striations as incidental, post-mortem damage. But now, under the harsh light of my growing certainty, they aligned perfectly with the unique wear patterns on a particular bone chisel I'd photographed. A specific tool, used with specific intent. Not a fall. A staged event. My breath hitched. The anachronistic details, once disparate anomalies, now wove a coherent narrative. Finch hadn't simply fallen. He had been incapacitated, likely with a blow to the head, then dragged to the precipice. The subtle, almost artistic, arrangement of certain objects at the scene, the broken compass, the scattered notes, was a grotesque misdirection, a signature of the keeper's conspiracy, designed to mislead any but the most meticulous eye. They wanted it to look like a man lost in his research, consumed by the past. But they hadn't accounted for my own obsession with the past's physical echoes. The keepers weren't just trading artifacts, they were actively preserving a specific, dangerous narrative, eliminating anyone who threatened to expose the truth behind their illicit acquisitions. Thorne, the esteemed historian, was not merely a participant, he was a key architect in this deception, his public persona a meticulously crafted shield. I moved to the satellite imagery, overlaying the terrain maps of Finch's estate with the property lines of Thorne's ancestral lands. A network of old, forgotten paths connected them, routes that bypassed public roads, unseen by casual observers. These were the arteries of their operation, the clandestine conduits for stolen history. The timing of Thorne's recent property expansion, the excavation of the ancient underground bunker, it all connected. He wasn't just acquiring artifacts, he was establishing a secure, hidden archive, a stronghold for the keeper's legacy. My internal monologue was a torrent of connections, each detail reinforcing the next. The fragments of ancient parchment I'd found secreted away in Finch's study, bearing the same unique watermarks as documents I'd seen in Thorne's private collection. The coded messages. The meticulous, almost ritualistic care with which the crime scene had been manipulated. This wasn't just a murder, it was an execution, orchestrated to send a message, to bury the truth under layers of manufactured history. The storm outside intensified, the yacht groaning under the assault. My hands trembled slightly as I organized the final reports, placing the damning photographic evidence on top. Each piece of paper represented weeks of painstaking work, sleepless nights, and the unwavering conviction that something was profoundly wrong. This wasn't just circumstantial, it was an unassailable forensic case, linking Thorne directly to Finch's murder and, by extension, to the heart of the Keeper's conspiracy. I closed the briefcases, the metallic clicks sharp and final. Presenting this evidence to the authorities, knowing how deeply compromised sections of the force might be, was akin to walking into a lion's den. My life, I knew, was now gravely at risk. But the truth, once unearthed, demanded to be seen, no matter the cost. The storm could rage, the waves could crash, but I had found my anchor in the unyielding facts. I stood at the railing, the chill of the rising wind biting at my exposed skin. The sea churned, a dark, roiling expanse reflecting the turmoil that had been brewing within me for weeks. This was it. The precipice. I retreated into the cabin, the mahogany gleaming under the dim light, momentarily shielding me from the storm's fury. The two briefcases sat exactly where I'd left them, symbols of weeks of relentless pursuit. One contained the digital files. The meticulous scans, the comparative analyses, the time-stamped photographs, every fragment of scientific evidence I'd painstakingly collected. The other held the physical proofs, a sliver of rare wood, a peculiar soil sample, the minute metallic residue that shouldn't have been present at the scene. These were the keys, the anachronisms that screamed murder, not accident. My fingers traced the cold metal clasps. Thorne, I knew, valued control above all else. He wouldn't tolerate exposure. My plan hinged on that precise arrogance. I activated the yacht's satellite phone, the screen flickering to life in the cabin's gloom. I had already sent the encrypted data to a trusted contact in federal enforcement, a contingency in case I didn't make it back. But for the immediate confrontation, I needed to play a different hand. With an edge I hadn't heard before. Seth. To what do I owe this? Intrusion? I think you know, I replied, glancing at the briefcases. I have everything. The full story. Dr. Finch's death wasn't an accident. It was an execution. And the keepers aren't preserving history, they're burying it under a mountain of lies and illicit trade. I paused, letting my words sink in. I'm coming to the estate. Alone. We need to talk. And I need to show you what I have. It was a gamble. But I was betting on his desire to control the narrative, to see the extent of my evidence before acting. He would want to know how much I knew, how deep I'd dug. Don't be foolish, Thorne said, a hint of steel in his tone. This can still be resolved. Quietly. Quietly is no longer an option, I countered, the storm outside seeming to echo my resolve. The truth has a way of finding its voice. I'll be there within the hour. If I'm not, or if I detect any unpleasantries, the entire dossier goes public. And trust me, it's comprehensive. He hung up without another word. The confrontation was set. Leaving the yacht was a struggle against the elements. The launch bounced violently over the choppy water, rain stinging my face, obscuring the distant lights of the estate. The briefcases, now my most precious cargo, were tucked securely under my waterproof jacket. The journey felt like a descent into a maelstrom, each wave a reminder of the forces I was up against. The driver, a taciturn man hired by the yacht's captain, merely grunted, his eyes fixed on the tumultuous horizon. He was an observer, nothing more. Finally, the small dock of the estate appeared through the driving rain. The manor, a silhouette against the bruised sky, seemed to loom, ancient and foreboding. The wind howled through its gables, a mournful cry that could have been Dr. Finch's ghost. I gripped the briefcases tighter, the weight of their contents a heavy responsibility. A single vehicle waited at the end of the dock. A driver, a hulking figure, opened the rear door without a word. I slipped inside, the warmth a stark contrast to the biting wind. The journey up the winding drive was short, silent. I was led directly to Thorne's study, a room I remembered from my initial investigation, but now it felt different, charged with a palpable tension. Thorne stood by the grand fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, his gaze fixed on the roaring flames. The scent of old leather and burning oak filled the air. "Seth," he said, turning, his face impassive. "You're punctual, if nothing else." I placed the 2 briefcases on the massive antique desk. Their presence stark against the polished wood. "I prefer to be thorough." "So I've heard," he replied, taking a slow sip. "Let's see just how thorough you've been." I opened the first briefcase, revealing the laptop. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up images, schematics, and detailed reports. Dr. Finch was pushed. Not from the balcony, as you orchestrated, but from the library window. A fall staged to look like an accident during a storm, mirroring the historical accident you wanted to preserve. Thorne's eyes narrowed. He said nothing. "The anachronistic details, Thorne, I continued, my voice gaining momentum. "The microscopic fragments of a specific type of limestone, found only in the deepest layers of the cellar, on Dr. Finch's clothing. Not the external stone of the manor. The unique particulate matter from the ancient papyrus dust, lodged in his fingernails, consistent with the scrolls found in your hidden underground bunker, scrolls Dr. Finch was likely examining just before his death." I brought up a 3D reconstruction of the library, highlighting the trajectory, the impact points. The pattern of bruising on Dr. Finch's wrists, inconsistent with a mere fall, but perfectly matched to a struggle where his hands were held. The faint, barely discernible impression of a signet ring on his skin, a ring with a specific crest. "Your crest, Thorne." "The crest of the keepers." I opened the second briefcase, revealing the small evidence bags. And here, the undeniable proof. This sliver of wood, found under Dr. Finch's shoe, matches the wood from the ancient crate in your underground facility, the one holding the forged artifact you were about to sell. And this, I held up a tiny vial, this specific soil sample, found on Dr. Finch's jacket, matches the unique composition of the earth surrounding the entrance to that very bunker. Thorne's composure finally cracked. His jaw tightened, his knuckles white around his glass. "Circumstantial. All of it. Forensic anthropology isn't about conjecture, Thorne. It's about evidence. These aren't just details, they're a narrative." Finch discovered the forgeries, the illicit trade. He threatened to expose the keepers. Dangerous. "You are meddling in things you cannot comprehend, Seth." He began to move, slowly, deliberately, towards the desk. His gaze was fixed not on me, but on the briefcases. I knew what he intended. A convincing one. The live feed was a lie, the timed release was real. His eyes flickered to the laptop screen, then back to mine. The anger in his face warred with a desperate calculation. He stopped, his body tense, frozen between aggression and caution. The storm outside raged, a mirror to the tempest brewing within the room. The climax. My life, Dr. Finch's justice, and the fate of the keepers hung precariously in the balance, suspended by the fragile thread of my intellect and the weight of my evidence. My finger hovered, a fraction of an inch from the trackpad, the send icon glowing under the dim cabin light. Outside, the storm was no longer merely closing in, it was upon us. Rain lashed against the portholes, each gust a physical blow. The air within the cabin crackled with the static charge of impending chaos, both meteorological and human. Thorn, his face a mask of primal fury, lunged. He wasn't aiming for me, but for the stack of briefcases near the desk, their metal clasps glinting menacingly. He intended to destroy them, to erase the physical record of his deceit. I saw the desperate glint in his eyes, the absolute conviction that if the data was gone, the truth would vanish with it. But he was too late. My thumb pressed down. A silent click, a flicker on the screen, and then the confirmation message, dossier sent. A guttural roar tore from Thorn's throat. He reached the briefcases, his hands scrabbling at the latches, but I was already moving. I didn't waste time with heroics. I snatched the laptop, clutching it to my chest, then kicked at the nearest briefcase, sending it skidding across the polished floorboards, out of his immediate reach. The yacht lurched again, throwing him off balance. He stumbled, cursing, his gaze now fixed on me, a predatory hunger burning in his eyes. "It's over," I stated, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. The words felt hollow, a mere formality against the backdrop of his rage. "They have everything." He didn't respond, just straightened, his shoulders rigid. The storm outside seemed to mirror his internal tempest, the cabin growing darker as the clouds thickened. He was trapped, cornered, and I knew the most dangerous animal was one with nothing left to lose. My eyes darted to the emergency beacon I'd activated earlier, a small, blinking light on the console. Help was coming, but how long would it take? A sudden, piercing siren cut through the din of the storm. Not from the yacht, but from the water outside. The distinct thrum of powerful engines grew louder, approaching fast. Thorn froze, his head snapping towards the porthole. His shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him as quickly as it had ignited. Moments later, the cabin door burst open, revealing a team of maritime enforcement officers, their rain-slicked uniforms gleaming under their tactical lights. They moved with practiced efficiency, weapons raised. One officer, his face grim, immediately secured Thorn, cuffing his hands behind his back. Another quickly scanned the cabin, his eyes landing on the briefcases. "Professor Seth," the lead officer asked, his voice calm amidst the chaos. "Are you all right?" I nodded, still clutching the laptop. "The briefcases," I managed, pointing. "They contain critical evidence. And the laptop has the full dossier." The officers quickly secured the briefcases, cataloging them with meticulous care. As Thorn was escorted from the yacht, his gaze met mine one last time. The architect of the conspiracy, reduced to a defeated figure led away in chains. The journey back to the mainland was a blur of debriefings and official statements. The storm raged for hours, but by the time we reached the docks, the first hint of dawn was breaking, painting the bruised sky in hues of bruised purple and gray. The air was clean, washed by the rain, but carried the lingering scent of salt and ozone. The dossier, coupled with the contents of the sealed briefcases, meticulously documented provenance papers, financial ledgers, encrypted communications, and photographs of the stolen artifacts provided irrefutable proof. The ancient artifacts, plundered from their rightful resting places, were slowly recovered from private collections and hidden vaults across the globe. I watched the news reports, read the headlines, and felt a strange mixture of triumph and weariness. The scientific precision I had applied to the bones, the earth, the minute and anachronisms, had shattered a carefully constructed illusion. Justice, in its slow, grinding way, had prevailed. But the emotional and psychological toll was immense. The quiet hum of the ventilation system, the sterile gleam of my instruments, it all felt different now. The world, once a collection of fascinating puzzles, now seemed riddled with hidden depths, with ancient conspiracies waiting to be exposed. I thought of the historian, a man whose life had been sacrificed for a truth he unknowingly stumbled upon. I thought of the countless others whose legacies had been twisted, whose heritage had been stolen. The pursuit of justice through science, I realized, was not a sterile academic exercise. It was a relentless, often brutal, excavation of truth, demanding a vigilance that stretched far beyond the confines of a laboratory. The phone rang, pulling me from my reverie. It was a colleague, his voice hushed, hinting at another call to a remote location, another anomaly. A flicker of something new stirred within me, not just duty, but a sharpened edge, a resolve forged in the crucible of thorns. Yet perhaps my role was no longer just to interpret the past, but to actively confront those who sought to distort it. The future, once a clear path of academic research, now seemed to stretch into a more dangerous, yet profoundly necessary, landscape of forensic investigation.